On August 3rd, 2025, under the weight of Washington, D.C.'s sweltering summer heat, a political confrontation unfolded that would reshape the Capitol's power dynamic forever. The atmosphere around the Capitol felt heavy, almost as if the city itself was bracing for impact. Inside the Oval Office, President Donald Trump, now serving as the 47th President of the United States, sat in quiet reflection. His gaze lingered on a list of over 100 crucial nominees, individuals poised to advance his policy agenda. But progress had stalled. Just hours earlier, news broke that Senate Majority Leader John Thone, once considered an ally, had announced a month-long Senate recess, effectively halting the confirmation process. It was a calculated move, a betrayal that blocked key positions from being filled and brought governance to a standstill. Each delay had consequences: policies left in limbo, families without answers, and national priorities suspended in a political tug-of-war. For Trump, this had gone beyond partisan struggle. It was now a direct affront to the American people's future. That same afternoon, an unexpected message reached the president. It came from an unlikely source: Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Known for his fierce opposition to Trump, Schumer had requested an immediate private meeting. The tone was unusually reserved, even diplomatic. Suspicious but intrigued, Trump agreed. He had always preferred to face his adversaries head-on. The meeting took place in a discreet Capitol conference room. Schumer, composed and deliberate, leaned forward, his voice low and confident. He claimed the recess deadlock could be resolved swiftly, that the confirmations could be pushed through in days. Trump listened without interruption, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Something about Schumer's cooperative manner felt off. Then came the offer, $25 billion. Framed as a political contribution, Schumer described it as a necessary step to ensure Democratic cooperation and immediate action. No further roadblocks, no more games, just a price tag. The room fell into tense silence. Schumer fully expected Trump to waver, to bend under pressure in order to preserve his agenda's momentum. But instead, something shifted. Trump's expression hardened. There was no outburst, no theatrics, just a quiet, resolute intensity. He leaned back, eyes locked onto Schumer. What was being proposed wasn't a political deal, it was extortion. Trump made it clear this wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, about refusing to sell out the American people for short-term political gain. Schumer's composure faltered. He attempted to downplay the proposal as routine, claiming this was how Washington had always operated. But Trump had heard enough. His voice rose sharp and unyielding. He rejected the offer outright, condemning it as a betrayal of public trust. He reminded Schumer that while he drew a taxpayer-funded salary, he had produced little of substance in decades of public service. The senator stood frozen, visibly shaken by the unexpected rebuke. He hadn't anticipated such defiance. Outside the room, the Capitol remained unaware of what had just transpired, but whispers began to spread. Word of the explosive private exchange leaked quickly, reverberating through the marble corridors of power. Staffers exchanged anxious glances, and the mood across Washington shifted. Something monumental had just occurred, and it wouldn't stay behind closed doors for long. Phones buzzed nonstop as rumors swirled across the Capitol. Something seismic had occurred, something that couldn't stay hidden. Inside the presidential motorcade, Donald Trump sat unmoved, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on the passing streets beyond the window. He had weathered years of relentless media attacks and endured mockery from across the political spectrum. Just yesterday, betrayal from within his own party had dealt another blow. Yet none of it compared to the trial he now faced. This time, the adversary wasn't a single individual or partisan faction. It was the very machinery of corruption that gripped Washington from within. Back at the White House, Trump convened a private strategy session. At his side was his son Barron, now 18 and showing signs of a sharp, analytical mind, alongside his chief of security and 3 trusted staffers. Trump spoke plainly, wasting no time on ceremony. Schumer had demanded a $2.5 billion bribe, framing it as the price for letting the wheels of government turn. The room fell still as his words sank in. After a brief pause, Barron asked the question on everyone's mind. What would his father do? Trump answered with unwavering certainty. He wouldn't hide behind closed doors. He would take the truth straight to the American people, exposing corruption in broad daylight. If the system preferred shadow warfare, he would counter with transparency and open confrontation. By the following morning, August 3rd, America was still digesting the shock of the sudden Senate recess. Over 100 presidential nominees remained trapped in limbo, caught in a deliberate power play. But Trump had already set a bold counteroffensive in motion. He called for an urgent press briefing, unusual in timing, but clearly calculated. Reporters from every major outlet flooded the press room. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all were in attendance. The air was electric with curiosity and speculation. What happened next would send shockwaves across the nation. In a move no one expected, Trump publicly invited Senator Chuck Schumer to the White House on live television. Cameras rolled, microphones were hot, and millions of Americans tuned in, unaware that they were about to witness a political earthquake. Schumer entered with a confident smirk, still convinced he held the upper hand. Perhaps he believed Trump would fold under public scrutiny, make a plea, or quietly concede. But what awaited was anything but submission. Trump stood calmly behind the podium, composed and focused. On the table beside him lay a cache of evidence, documents, internal communications, emails, and surveillance audio. A large screen behind him loomed, ready to deliver a devastating blow. Schumer's smile began to fade. The trap had been set with precision. This wasn't just a press briefing, it was a public reckoning. Trump stepped forward and addressed the room, his tone steady and clear. He described an offer made to him the previous day, one that was not just unethical, but deeply corrupt. He revealed that he had been asked to hand over $2.5 billion, not for the benefit of the nation, but in exchange for political cooperation. A wave of shock moved through the press corps. Then he made the revelation. The offer had come from the very man standing beside him, Senator Chuck Schumer. Schumer stammered, attempting to protest, but Trump was ready. He raised his hand to silence the interruption, then pressed a button. Instantly, the screen came to life. An audio recording played with crystal clarity. Schumer's voice echoed through the room, cold, confident, unmistakable. $5 billion, Mr. President. That's the simple price. You want your people confirmed? You'll need to cooperate accordingly. What followed was total silence. The briefing room was frozen. Reporters sat in stunned disbelief. Even Schumer's own staff appeared blindsided. The moment was historic, not a leak, not speculation, but concrete evidence of political coercion revealed in real time before the nation. Turning back to the cameras, President Trump spoke with calm conviction. He declared that he had refused the offer without hesitation, that he would rather allow the Senate to remain in recess indefinitely than compromise the nation's integrity. There would be no funding of corruption, not with taxpayer dollars, and certainly not at the expense of the American people's future. Behind him, Senator Schumer stood frozen, and in that instant, a once powerful political figure visibly unraveled before the eyes of a stunned nation. As the final words of the recording echoed and faded, the East Room fell into an almost unbearable silence. Reporters glanced around, uncertain whether to take notes, keep filming, or simply try to comprehend the magnitude of what had just unfolded. This wasn't an allegation, it was incontrovertible proof. A sitting senator had been exposed live on national television, not through hearsay, but through his own voice. The broadcast continued without interruption. Across the country, viewers stared at their screens in disbelief. Some sat frozen, others gasped aloud. Trump remained composed, offering no smug satisfaction. He didn't need it. Instead, he spoke again, this time with words that cut to the heart of Washington's dysfunction. He described a system where corruption thrived behind handshakes and hollow smiles, where betrayal was disguised as routine political maneuvering. He reminded the nation of his original promise to drain the swamp. And on this day, he had pulled the plug even further. Schumer, now visibly shaken, muttered something unintelligible and turned away. He staggered toward the exit, leaving behind not just a press briefing, but a shattered reputation. That moment, captured from multiple angles, began spreading across the internet with lightning speed. Hashtags lit up every major platform. Schumer bribery, shock Trump truth bomb. the storm was only beginning. Phones across the country lit up in a digital frenzy in homes, diners, factories, and small-town main streets. Americans were glued to their screens. Veterans watched with quiet pride. Parents paused their busy routines to witness history. Even those who typically ignored politics found themselves riveted. He had refused the bribe, a $2.5 billion offer flatly rejected. One television anchor, barely above a whisper, remarked that no matter one's political stance, that kind of decision showed true integrity. Trump's approval ratings spiked within hours, especially among independents and working-class Americans. Across social media, people shared footage of the moment, some with tears in their eyes. For many, the emotion wasn't just anger or disbelief, it was hope. For the first time in a long time, they believed someone in power had chosen principle over politics. Meanwhile, Schumer vanished from public view. His social media accounts went silent. No press releases, no official statements, not even a prepared defense. A few Democratic voices tried to control the damage to reshape the narrative, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. Even centrist lawmakers began distancing themselves quickly, realizing that political survival now meant separation from the scandal. In the West Wing, Barron Trump watched the aftermath unfold beside his father. Quietly, he said, "You made the right call." Trump nodded but clarified. It wasn't simply about right or wrong. It was about preserving honor, something long forgotten in the halls of power, but now brought into sharp focus. By the next morning, the scandal had detonated across the media landscape. Investigative reporters began digging deeper into Schumer's past. Allegations from his time under the Biden administration began resurfacing. Disturbing financial links, questionable foundations, and foreign entanglements came to light all at once. It was as if exposing the bribe had ripped the lid off a hidden vault of corruption. Inside the White House, Trump met with his legal team. His instructions were clear. Let everything come out. No mercy, no backroom deals. This time, the system would be held fully accountable. Back in New York, a retired school teacher shared a video that quickly went viral. Through tears, she recalled losing her pension during the biting years while her husband had lost job security. And now, watching the corruption being uncovered, she found herself overwhelmed with emotion. "God bless President Trump," she said. "For once, someone stood up for us." The clip resonated across the nation because millions felt the same way. In the days that followed, the White House was inundated with thousands of handwritten letters. They came from all corners of the country, from cities, rural towns, coastlines, and heartlands. Some were just a few words scribbled in haste. "Thank you for refusing to surrender to corruption." Others filled multiple pages detailing personal accounts of hardship, loss, and disillusionment. These weren't political statements. They were emotional outpourings from Americans who felt they had been voiceless for far too long. What they had witnessed wasn't just political theater. It was a moment of rare authenticity, and they connected with it deeply. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership scrambled to manage the fallout. Some party figures publicly called for Senator Schumer's immediate resignation. Others chose to remain silent, clearly unsettled by the clarity of the evidence. On the Senate floor, chairs sat empty. A sense of unease had taken hold, and the usual rhythm of Washington had been disrupted. That morning, President Trump walked into the Roosevelt Room carrying a sealed folder that had not yet been disclosed to the public. Inside were documents even more damning than what had already been revealed. Evidence of years-long financial misconduct, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and systemic abuses of power that extended through multiple administrations. Schumer's name appeared again and again, etched into the very fabric of that corruption. At exactly 3:45 p.m. on August 3rd, Trump stepped onto the south lawn of the White House. The wind pulled at his suit jacket as reporters gathered in anticipation. Cameras snapped, rolling live to millions of screens across the globe. There were no teleprompters, just Trump standing alone, eyes fixed on the nation. He spoke with sincerity and emotion, addressing the American people directly. He spoke not of politics, but of people, of the 100 nominees still blocked, of mothers waiting on critical healthcare reforms, of small business owners struggling under outdated policies and teachers left, stranded by political inertia. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Not from fear, but from conviction. They don't serve you, he said plainly. They serve themselves. In a small town in Arkansas, a retired Marine stood watching. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't surrender, the man whispered. He chose us. Across the country, that same sentiment echoed in living rooms and offices, schools and farmhouses. For the first time in years, many Americans felt seen, truly represented by the man behind the podium. Later that evening, something small arrived in the Oval Office, but its weight was immeasurable. A single sheet of lined notebook paper, the words written in pencil, arrived from Pennsylvania. It was from an 11-year-old boy named Elijah. His letter read, "Dear President Trump, my daddy lost his job 3 years ago. We live in a trailer now, but he says you're fighting for families like ours. I watched you on television today. You said no to $2,5 billion. I don't know exactly how much money that is, but my daddy said it's a lot. Thank you for not forgetting about us. You're my hero. Love, Elijah." Trump read the letter twice, then quietly placed it in the top drawer of his desk. That night, he gave a private directive: find Elijah. Not for a photo op or political gain, but to thank him for the kind of honesty that can't be staged. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. The country had been shaken, but not by division or scandal. This time it was truth that had moved them. A rare, unfiltered moment of principle had pierced through years of noise, and it touched the nation's heart in a way no poll could measure. In Iowa, a video began circulating online. It showed Harold, a 68-year-old farmer, standing in front of a rusted barn. A fourth-generation American, he had lost nearly everything during the inflation crisis of the Biden era. His son had long since moved to Canada in search of work, and now Harold lived alone with 2 aging cows and the distant memories of a more stable past. In the video, his voice cracked with emotion. "I don't have much left," he said, "but I watched the president yesterday. He turned down that $2.5 billion bribe, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud to be an American again." The video spread quickly, not because of its production quality, but because of its honesty. Across the country, a tidal wave of emotional response swept through communities. Truck drivers, factory workers, and small-town families began posting personal videos, raw, unedited, and deeply moving. In living rooms and kitchens, men and women wept openly. Veterans stood solemnly saluting their television screens. But these weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition. For the first time in years, they felt seen, heard, understood. Where Schumer had demanded money, Trump had demanded change. And that stark contrast echoed across dinner tables in every corner of America. Later that same afternoon, something unexpected happened. Barron Trump, now 18, recorded a short, unplanned message for his social media followers. The video was unfiltered, recorded straight from his phone with no scripts or edits. His voice was steady, his expression sincere. He spoke of watching his father face constant attacks, lies, betrayals, name-calling. But now the world had seen the truth for themselves. His father had refused a $25 billion bribe in front of the nation, not for power or praise, but because betraying the people's trust was never an option. At the same time, a cold, formal statement emerged from Senator Schumer's office. The tone was defensive. The bribery allegations were flatly denied. The statement blamed misinformation, accused Trump of political theater, and dismissed the scandal as manipulation. But the words rang hollow. America had already seen the footage, heard the audio, felt the impact. The damage was done, and irreversible. Back in his office, Schumer sat in isolation. The curtains were drawn. His phone remained silent. No calls of support, no statements of solidarity. Even his closest political allies had distanced themselves. His staff walked past him carefully, avoiding eye contact, unsure of what to say or whether to say anything at all. Reluctantly, he turned on the television. Another video was playing, this time a waitress from Michigan. She spoke through sobs, recounting the pain of losing her husband to cancer. She described how their pleas for assistance were ignored time and time again. And then, voice trembling, she spoke of Trump. He looked into the camera and said, "I serve you first. No president has ever made me feel that seen." Schumer quickly turned off the screen. Meanwhile, in Birmingham, Alabama, inside a modest church sanctuary, Pastor Ray Jefferson stood behind his worn wooden pulpit. Behind him, a faded American flag hung against the wall. He was live-reaming his message to a congregation struggling under the weight of inflation and job insecurity. "I've watched presidents come and go," he said, voice cracking with emotion. "But what I saw yesterday, a president rejecting a $2.5 billion bribe in front of the world, that's not politics. That's courage. That's integrity. And I thank God I'm alive to see it." Across the country, similar sentiments echoed, not driven by party loyalty, but by something far deeper, a rekindled hope that leadership could still be grounded in principle. As evening settled in, a black SUV pulled quietly into a trailer park nestled in rural Pennsylvania. There were no news crews, no cameras, no flashing lights, just a discreet visit, almost invisible. Then, to the astonishment of nearby residents, President Donald J. Trump stepped out of the vehicle. Inside one of the modest trailers, 11-year-old Elijah sat at the kitchen table, focused on his homework. His mother was washing dishes when she turned toward the door and dropped a plate in disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes the moment she opened the door. President Trump stood there quietly, then knelt beside the stunned young boy seated at the kitchen table. "Are you Elijah?" he asked gently. The boy nodded, unable to speak. Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the now creased letter, folded, worn, clearly read many times over. Elijah stared at it, recognizing his own handwriting. Without a word, he threw his arms around the president in a tight embrace. Overcome with emotion, he whispered, "Thank you for never abandoning people like us." Trump returned the hug without hesitation, his expression one of quiet warmth. It was a deeply human moment, unplanned, raw, and powerful. But just as the nation was catching its breath, another revelation shattered the calm. A new security video had surfaced. It was uploaded without fanfare, appearing on a small, anonymous account. But within minutes, it had gone viral. The footage came from a previously unknown angle, a hidden camera inside the Capitol's private meeting room. It captured the exact moment of Schumer's bribe offer. The audio was clear, the image undeniable. Schumer's voice carried across the room, calm and confident. "No one will ever know," he said. "Just transfer it through a trusted associate quietly. In return, we'll confirm every nominee without delay." Then came Trump's answer, firm, unshakable. "You're asking me to steal from the American people and help you launder it through my office? Absolutely not, never." The video rippled through the nation like a thunderclap. Major news networks initially tried to avoid broadcasting it, but within hours their silence broke. The footage was too widespread, too explosive, too real. By midnight, thousands of citizens had gathered outside Capitol Hill. Their chants echoed through the night. "You can't silence truth. We stand with him." Inside his private residence, Trump watched from a window as the crowd swelled. He stood not as a strategist or politician, but as the man they now saw as their advocate, their voice, their defender. In a small town in Missouri, a woman named Teresa Caldwell recorded her own message, standing barefoot on her porch, holding a baby monitor in one hand and her phone in the other. She spoke quietly into the camera. Her husband, a welder, had lost his job months earlier. The federal programs that could have helped him had been stalled, trapped in the gridlock of the Senate's recess. "President Trump," she said, choking back tears, "I just want to thank you, not for political reasons, but for choosing us, for choosing the people over their money. They tried to manipulate us, but you didn't play their game." She paused, her voice faltering. "We don't have much left, but thanks to you, we still have our dignity because you never gave up yours." Back in Washington, something strange was unfolding. Though the Senate recess had technically begun, the Capitol was far from empty. Many senators had remained, but none were speaking publicly. No statements, no interviews, no press appearances. It was as if the entire Senate had vanished. The once busy hallways were now eerily quiet. Whispers passed through them like wine through an abandoned cathedral. Even Senator John Thune, the architect behind the recess, had not left Washington. Instead, he stayed hidden behind his office doors, watching the national reaction unfold in silence. He had believed the recess would weaken Trump. Instead, it had backfired catastrophically. What was intended as a political maneuver had ignited a nationwide uprising, a movement that was only growing stronger by the hour. And as for Chuck Schumer, still there was nothing, no statement, no appearance, just silence. By the early hours of August 5th, however, the message on America's roads had grown deafening. From the back roads of Idaho to the highways of Indiana, truckers formed convoys stretching for miles. The message was simple but powerful. We stand with Trump. This was no organized campaign. No party machinery had orchestrated it. These were independent drivers, many of whom had never joined a political rally in their lives. They rolled through towns, blaring their horns in solidarity. Crowds lined the streets, waving flags and cheering in support. In Ohio, a young father stood with tears in his eyes as he lifted his newborn son toward the passing convoy. "This," he said through sobs, "this is what leadership looks like." Drone footage of the massive truck convoys swept across the internet, becoming a symbol of a nation rising, not in division, but in unity. At exactly 8:01 p.m. that evening, all major news networks cut to a live broadcast from the White House. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music, just President Donald J. Trump seated at his desk, the American flag behind him. His hands were clasped in front of him, still steady, resolved. "My fellow Americans," he began. His tone wasn't that of a speechmaker. It was of a man beginning a conversation, one born out of necessity, truth, and personal accountability. With clarity and transparency, he laid everything bare. The $2, $5 billion bribe, the audio recordings, Senator Thune's betrayal, the media's efforts to downplay the scandal, and the pain of working families caught in the fallout. There was no teleprompter, no notes, just Trump speaking from the weight of lived experience, carrying the trust of a nation on his shoulders and determined not to let it slip. Then he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked with emotion. "I could have taken the offer," he admitted. "It would have been easy. I could have justified it as politics as usual and moved on. But I made a sacred promise to you and to God that I would never betray the trust of the American people. Not for power, not for convenience, not even for $2.5 billion in political leverage." In a quiet classroom in Kentucky, teacher Carla Hines had chosen to air the address during her morning civics lesson. As the broadcast ended, a normally distracted boy slowly raised his hand. "Mrs. Hines," he asked thoughtfully, "why would he say no if it meant getting everything he wanted?" She smiled gently, recognizing the depth behind the question. "Because sometimes," she replied, "doing what's morally right means letting go of immediate rewards and gaining something far more lasting in return." Later, she shared her thoughts online. "Today, I taught 26 students what real integrity looks like, not from a textbook, but by watching a man take a stand when surrender would have been so much easier. Thank you, President Trump, for giving my students a lesson they'll carry for life," while the rest of the country felt a wave of unity, of healing. Chuck Schumer remained alone in his darkened Senate office. He sat slouched in silence, the room illuminated only by the soft blue glow of a television screen. On it, the president's address replayed for the third time that night. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. The collapse had begun, and this time it was personal. Schumer's face was ghostly pale, his jaw clenched tight as the president's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. Every sentence struck like thunder, each one driving the weight of truth deeper into the foundation of his collapsing career. Then the final blow landed. A whistleblower from within Schumer's own staff had come forward, leaking a trove of internal memoranda. Among the documents were detailed records outlining Schumer's long-term plan to obstruct Trump's administration in exchange for earmarks, donor kickbacks, and political favors. One line from the documents rose above the rest and spread like wildfire across the internet. "If Trump refuses cooperation, we completely freeze his entire administration indefinitely." That memo, dated just days before the now infamous meeting with the president, erased any doubt. The corruption hadn't been impulsive. It had been carefully planned. The nation's response was immediate, and it wasn't loud or theatrical. Instead, it was quiet, beautiful, and unmistakably powerful. Firefighters in uniform stood beside glowing candles. Teachers placed small lights in their classroom windows. Truckers flicked their headlights in steady rhythm across the highways. Veterans saluted in silence. College students gathered in courtyards holding phones aloft like lanterns. None of it had been organized. None of it scripted. But the message was crystal clear. We stand with truth. We stand with integrity. In a modest North Carolina living room, Elijah sat beside his mother, his small hand gripping hers. He refused their money. "Mama," he said softly. He chose what was right. Hundreds of miles away on a quiet stretch of farmland in Iowa, Harold hammered a wooden sign into his fence. The words painted by hand read simply, "Trump stood firm, so we stand with him." And in the Oval Office, President Donald J. Trump stood at the window, gazing out over the National Mall. Below, thousands of flickering lights shimmered in the darkness, a sea of quiet defiance, not born of anger, but of conviction. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. Not with pride, but with renewed clarity. He had turned down a fortune, but in return, he had earned something far greater: his nation's trust. If this story moved you, if it reached your heart in ways you didn't expect, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to stand with those who choose principle over power. Subscribe if you believe truth should always rise above corruption. And tell us in the comments which part of this journey touched you the most. And if you'd like to support this growing movement, consider joining our channel membership for exclusive behind-the-scenes content, extended footage, and bonus moments that reveal the full story behind the story. This is more than a YouTube channel. This is a movement for truth, for accountability, and for hope. God bless each and every one of you.